Hello, everybody. Welcome to the launch of the Human Behaviour Change Project Knowledge System. I'm Susan Mickey, Professor of Health Psychology at University College London and the Principal Investigator on this 6-year project funded by the Wellcome Trust, and I'll be chairing today's meeting. So starting with why do we need the knowledge system? The starting point is that changing human behaviour is at the heart of solving the crises facing humanity. For example, climate change, infectious disease, antimicrobial resistance. And papers reporting intervention evaluations to change behaviour are being published at the rate of more than 100 a week, many more than human beings can keep up with. In addition, studies are reported in highly varied ways, often with important information omitted, using vague or ambiguous words. We need a shared language to be able to link evidence across teams and disciplines. And to build knowledge from the huge amounts of complex evidence that we have, we need automation. And this requires evidence to be computer readable. We need to transform how we generate knowledge. So one of the other starting points for this project was that whether one's a researcher, a policymaker, planner, practitioner, when it comes to behaviour change interventions, people want answers to questions along the lines of the following complicated question. When it comes to behaviour change interventions, what works, compared with what, for what behaviours, how well, for how long, with whom, in what setting, and why? The Human Behaviour Change Project was a collaborative project funded by the Wellcome Trust and included UCL, University of Aberdeen, University of Cambridge, and IBM Research. Here are the large group of amazing people who've worked with us over the years. In the first column are the behavioural scientists, in the second, the computer scientists, and in the third, the systems architects. The knowledge system is made up of many components, which you'll hear more about over the next 3 hours. Components of study finding, the behaviour change intervention ontology, which has got both search and visualization tools, study report annotation, a study database, research browser, outcome prediction, and paper authoring. The project has taken the main use case of randomized trials of smoking cessation interventions. But the vision for this knowledge system is to extend it to all types of studies of all types of behavioural interventions. But that is going to require a lot of collaboration and more funding. Everything that we've done is and continues to be open source and open access. So what have we learned? Well, many, many things, but I've just singled out a few. First of all, collaboration across different disciplines is not always easy, but it's vital, and it can work given the time and the listening powers. There's huge potential for collaboration between behavioural and computational sciences. And I think definitely one of the things that I didn't expect to learn, but we did learn, is that whilst artificial intelligence is better than humans at certain things, we still need humans in the loop to bring real-world knowledge to add value to computation. And what have we achieved? We've achieved a well-functioning, semi-automated study identification, knowledge organisation, and outcome prediction systems. And these aren't easy things, but we have achieved that. But what we haven't yet achieved is a fully automated information extraction system. And the challenges we've found have been identifying information according to study arms, especially when they're not obvious in papers and maybe referred to in different ways, extracting information from tables and diagrams, and the very diverse ways in which study reports are written, which is always going to be a problem, but you'll hear more about how to address this later in the session. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that I think we've achieved the beginnings of a truly scientific study of interventions to change behaviour, which has the potential to revolutionise the field. So in this workshop today, we'll introduce you to the resources and tools of the knowledge system, familiarise you with their functionality, and show you how to find them on the new Human Behaviour Change Project website. These are the lists of sessions that we're going to have and the different people who are leading on them. And we're roughly aiming for 15 minutes per block, including hopefully a question or two after each session, but we'll have a longer Q&A at the end. Actually, if we go back, sorry, Robert, I'll just go through those. So we're going to have next introduction to the HBCP Knowledge System and tools, then a demonstration of the study finding and research browser tools, then of the BCIO search and visualization tools, the outcome prediction tool, the paper authoring tool, and introducing the behavior change intervention ontology training program. And then I'll finish with some reflections on next steps. Depending on the timing, there'll be a time for a couple of questions after each presentation. Do post your questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat box, the Q&A box. Upvote those that you most like answered. And we'll take one specific to the session during it. And then Mary Johnson will be facilitating the Q&As at the end. And we will get through as many as we can, but any that we haven't been able to answer, we'll answer on the Open Science Framework page. So do go to that. Great, and now it's my pleasure to hand over to Robert West, who's going to introduce the Human Behaviour Change Knowledge System and tools.
Great. Well, hi, everyone. It's great to see so many of you here. And I know that many of you have already been coming to the webinars. So some of this will be quite familiar to you, I expect. But also some of you, this will be absolutely brand new to you. So we'll try and make it interesting for everyone and make sure that we cover all the bases and that everyone learns something from it. Okay, so the knowledge system. Well, Let's take a scenario that we're trying to understand and make a prediction about. And here's an example question of the sort that one might want to answer. And it goes something like this. What's the likely outcome of a smoking cessation intervention delivered face-to-face by a doctor, including social support, problem solving, and nicotine replacement therapy in middle-aged female patients averaging 10 cigarettes per day? Now, that's not all the components of Susan's big question, because there's a lot of things that aren't in there, but it gives you a sense of the kind of information that all of these things potentially could make a difference to the sort of outcome that you'd expect from an intervention. Now, what you can do then is you can put that into blocks of information. What about the information? What about the intervention? So, okay, what's it got in it? It's got behavior change techniques of social support, problem solving, and nicotine replacement therapy. The delivery is face-to-face, and the source of the intervention is a medical doctor. The population is female patients, averaging 50 years, 10 cigarettes a day. The behavior smoking cessation for 6 months, continuous abstinence. And you also have to have, in order to be able to interpret the results, something about the methods. In this case, what makes a difference is whether it's biochemically verified. So in order to answer that question, you need something like the knowledge system. You've got to find the relevant studies in the first place. You've got to be able to organize the evidence, make predictions using that evidence, and then make sure, ideally, that all the studies contain all the relevant information which is already organized in an ideal world. And that's where the knowledge system comes in. So those of you who have access to the web, which you must have, otherwise you wouldn't be watching this, and if you go onto another tab, you can try this out. This is the brand new Human Behaviour Change Project website, which has replaced the one of the same names. It's now taken over from that one. That one is now in sort of legacy form, so you can go back to it. And on it, what you'll see on the website are all the different tools and links to the various different bits and pieces. Now, one way of conceptualizing the knowledge system is a series of components, and that includes 6 of the tools, or 6 tools that we've got here, and other parts such as our annotation system, which, because we weren't able to create a fully automated system, that was done manually, and we have our study database. And we're going to go through each of these in turn in this webinar. And then obviously a really important part of this was the behavior change intervention ontology, which is marked out here, and the tools relating to that, and we'll cover those. Now, the behavior change intervention ontology has its own website, which you can link to from the human behavior change ontology, sorry, human behavior change project website, but it's also able to be accessed directly at bciontology.org. And that's how you can access all the tools and stuff relating to the ontology. And we'll demo that later. So what we'll be doing is introducing tools relevant to these 4 tasks: finding studies, organizing the evidence, making predictions, and improving study reporting. And we have the study finding tool and the research browser tool, which we're going to come to in just a minute. That's these 2 here. This is, I'm going through this very quickly because we'll be coming back to everything, so you have plenty of time to look at it. Then we've got the ontology stuff, the search tool and visualization tool. We've got the outcome prediction tool, and then we've got the paper authoring tool. And all of those tools, as I say, can be accessed from the HBCP website, which has got the URL there. Now, what we're going to do, I think now, is to go to the demos. And the first thing we're going to demo is the study finding and research browser tools. And James Thomas is going to take over directly from me, I hope, and take over the screen sharing so that he can show his slides, and then we can demo the tools. James, are you there?
Hello. Yes, I'm here, I hope. I will share my screen right now. Here we go. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing my slides now of the demonstration of the study finding and research browser tools. So there are actually three live tools here that I'm going to talk about, which are on the sort of like the user interface end of things, which you can interact with. There are links on the websites that Robert's just mentioned, and you can go and browse them now. Though please stay for the presentation now and then go and look at them later if you like. There are 2 study exploration tools, one containing the data set we used that Robert mentioned for smoking cessation, and another a similar data set on physical activity. And then there is the RCT finder, which is the tool which contains the results of our automatic identification of studies in this area. And I'll talk about those in a little more detail in a moment. So just to remind you though of the question that Robert asked, what is the likely outcome of a smoking cessation intervention delivered face-to-face by a doctor, including social support, problem solving, nicotine replacement therapy, etc.? So quite a precise question. And Robert and others will talk later about how we have developed this prediction system, which is able to take evidence and information from a number of different studies which might be relevant to answering this question. But in terms of just finding studies on this, I'm just going to take you through how we can use the systems that we've got here to conduct really quite precise searches to find studies that might be relevant to answering this. So I will move over to hopefully this share here. And hopefully now you can see the user interface of the study exploration tool in smoking cessation. So this tool contains the data set of about 500 studies, which have been carefully and in detail annotated according to the ontology, which will be presented shortly. So on the left-hand side here, we've got the various domains within the ontologies: populations, interventions, outcomes, etc. We're interested in interventions, aren't we, in this particular search? And those of you familiar with the behavior change taxonomy will no doubt recognize some of this. In the first one, we've got the various behavior change techniques under goals and planning. So I can, for example, I can find all of the records which talk about goal setting. Here they are on goal setting. I can click on any of these. I can click on this record here. I can see more information about the record. I've got the full bibliographic information. I can click on the URIs and the URLs, and slightly not quite as quickly as in some cases. There we go. We've got the Wiley publication that comes up there. So we've got the usual bibliographic information. On top of that, we've also got all of the information that the team has entered about this record against the ontology. So there's lots of information at the top here about the population, the interventions, and we've got which BCTs are used in this intervention, several different BCTs. Also, the reason that this BCT has been selected as applying to this intervention, and also actual quotations from the PDFs in this case, which justify that assignment. So we've got a lot of detailed information which is browsable and accessible on the web. I won't stand here and read them all through because that would take a little while. There's lots and lots of information there about each study. Actually, what I meant to show you there, I'll show you in a moment, is that all of this information can just be downloaded. But if we come back to our question, we were interested in, let's check, social support, problem solving, and face-to-face delivery, for example. So I can run searches over here, but I can also take advantage of evidence and gap maps, which have sort of been created behind the scenes. So I've got one here, which is goals and planning and social support, for example. So what we've done here is we have cross-tabulated the goals and planning against social supports. And then I've got facets here, which are about the delivery of the intervention. So I can see here, there are lots and lots of studies in the database, indicated by these big circles, on problem solving and social support, rather fewer on emotional social support, fewer on goal setting as an outcome. There are gaps here. There's nothing on social support, practical or emotional for these particular behavior change techniques. So it gives us a picture of the evidence sitting in the database. We were interested in, let me see, it was face-to-face, wasn't it? I think, yes, face-to-face, which are the red circles here. And we wanted social support and problem solving, for example. So we can see red circle, problem solving, social support. There are 39 records in the database on that. And there they all are. If we want, we can click and we can download them and import them into EndNote or a similar software package, or into Excel. We can browse them, as I've shown you before. We can order them by journal and IDs and that kind of thing. So it's a bibliographic database, but it's based on an awful lot of detailed information about the studies. So I'll just pop back to the presentation. There we go. So that's telling you that we have one database for smoking cessation and another one for physical activity, which basically looks the same. So I won't take you through that. What I will take you through is this evidence surveillance workflow that we've set up. The idea is that we maintain a surveillance of the literature as it emerges to maintain reviews, and our database is up to date. And we're linked in with OpenAlex, the big open access database, which has now been going for well over a year, and took over from Microsoft Academic and is going from strength to strength. And in our database, we've got reviews on physical activity, as we call them. So the data set on physical activity, the data set on smoking cessation. And what we do is for every single sort of domain or database or review, systematic review or other type of review that we've got in the system, we learn the scope of the review through machine learning. We'd build a machine learning model for each review. And when OpenAlex publishes new reports and new publications, new research papers, we take a snapshot of that once a month at the moment. Depends, we've got there every 2 weeks. Sometimes it's every 2 weeks. We could actually do it every hour, apparently now using their API, but that might be too often for many people to keep up to date with. So at the moment, we've been doing it every 2 weeks, every month. We get a new batch of papers, and every single paper is scored against every single review. And the papers that look as though they're relevant to Human Behavior Change Project end up in those two databases, the physical activity and the smoking cessation databases. And we use some other machine learning along the way to make sure that we've got things on target. So we've got a distance model, this review distance model, which identifies the broad scope of the research we're interested in. As we're only interested in randomized trials, for example, we use machine learning, a randomized controlled trials classification tool to automatically identify the randomized trials out of all of the new literature on, in this case, smoking cessation. We've also been using the system for COVID-19 evidence surveillance throughout the pandemic, and we've got the same workflow. We've got OpenAlex at the top. We've got, is a study about COVID-19 or not? If it is, it carries on through the system. Which category does it belong to? And so thanks to the fact that we've got hundreds of thousands of records in there, tens of thousands of them have been manually annotated by humans, we were able to build an accurate model to predict which category each of the records belongs to. And so we've moved now from a purely manual workflow into a position where basically all of that work is automated, and we're not actually reviewing the papers manually ourselves anymore. So I was just going to, if there was time, just to quickly show you what that looked like. Actually, I think I'll stop because the user interface is pretty much the same as you've already seen, and I'd like to leave some time for questions. So I will stop sharing at that point, and I will take some questions if there are any.
Thanks, James. Yep, there's quite a few questions. Simple one first, but what is OpenAlex?
OpenAlex is brilliant. That tells you exactly what it is, doesn't it? OpenAlex is an initiative that has been funded by the Arcadia Foundation, and they are essentially taking as much research as they can. So all of the bibliographic information from Crossref, from PubMed, from they are also scouring the web to basically create a repository of all of the world's research knowledge. That is essentially their ambition. They're hindered a little bit by publishers wanting to keep research secret, but what they're trying to do is basically have a citation network and an authors network and an institution network, where if you want to find a research paper, it's going to be in their database. It's by far now the biggest open access bibliographic database in the world now. It's got about 250 million research papers in it. So what's great about it is its aim is to be comprehensive, it wants to be up to date, and it wants to be open access. So it's a fantastic resource.
Great, thank you. Is there any weighting or correction to account for the quality of the studies included?
Well, of course, that's a slightly contested area, but the fact that we're filtering according to randomized trials tells you that we filtered out quite a lot of stuff which is less able to give us that strength of causal relationship between an intervention and the claimed outcome. Obviously, there are all sorts of sources of bias within randomized trials. So we couldn't claim that the database is got only high quality studies in it, but then partly the sort of like the utility and the relevance and the reliability of studies partly depends upon the use case that you're putting them to. So the idea really is on this is that we want a surveillance of the literature for people to then to be able to use themselves, rather than us filtering things out other than the on study type at the moment, we're not using something like Robot Reviewer, which we could do, which is aiming to sort of put risk of bias assessments against the studies. We'll have to think about that.
Thanks. Is there any way, is this just focused on health and policy literature, or also broader behavioural and organisational change? I mean, I'm happy to say something about that. I mean, this system is being developed in the context of behaviour change interventions generally, but taking a use case, main use case of smoking cessation. So the answer, I think, would be broader behavioural change. So any interventions to change behaviour. And in terms of organisational change, how we have it set up is that we define the outcome as a behaviour. And obviously a lot of organisational change requires human behaviour change to bring about organisational change. But the whole system can be adapted to different kinds of outcome measures. So that would be my initial answer. James, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I could say, thinking about the way that we've put it together, we've deliberately tried to keep it broad so that, we've got OpenAlex at one end of it, which is just as much as everything as possible. And then the machine learning is agnostic in terms of the specific health or policy literature that it's looking at. And so, yeah, the reason I put the COVID-19 surveillance in there was just to show that the way that it's been put together is broad in application. And so, yeah, if we wanted to focus particularly on, organizational change, for example, then it could be switched to doing that. And all it's doing is learning from the papers that were already in the system. So if you put papers on organizational change in there, the system will say, aha, what you want is organizational change. And it will start finding organizational change papers. So potentially, yes. I mean, obviously, there are ontologies, which are going to be talked about in a bit, which are particularly focused on what we've been focused on in this project. But this part of the system is deliberately kept quite broad.
Okay, and we've got two more questions I think we can get in before the break that I think are specific to this session. Will the AI technology be able to upload the same paper to multiple databases if it discusses several issues? Yeah,
it does. Yeah, for example, we've got one on COVID, we've got another one on long COVID, and the relevant papers go on both when relevant.
Great. Are non-English language papers included? And is there a way to search for certain health system characteristics, e.g. different professionals delivering or length of consultation time, etc.?
Sorry, what was the first part?
Well, the first one is non-English language.
Non-English, I knew it was, yes. That's one of the things that we've been looking at actually in terms of using OpenAlex rather than traditionally PubMed and Embase and those types of databases. We have found that it contains more non-English language papers, and its geographical spread seems to be slightly different. So I did a comparison about a year ago of papers that we'd found in the PubMed and Embase searches that we did to begin with, and then compared those with the ones that we'd found using OpenAlex. And I looked at slightly, geeky way of doing it, but I looked at the longitude of the first author's institution. And what I found was that on average, the ones that were in the first parts, the sort of like traditional systematic review sources, the longitude to put them somewhere off Spain, but in the Atlantic, whereas the OpenAlex was further off to the east, sort of East Europe sort of thing. So it wasn't a massive difference, but it did suggest to me that that there's quite a bias in some of the sources that we traditionally use, and we need to be careful of that. B, that OpenAlex might solve that in some respects, but also see that it doesn't have all of the non-English language journals in it by any means. So that's still work in progress. As for being able to search on those other aspects, we've got to bear in mind that this part of the system, I didn't show you, there's a free text search. You can search on free text as you would expect to be able to do, but we've only got the titles and abstracts to go with here. We don't actually have all the full text of every paper. So if it's not in the title and the abstract, then you can't search for it.
Okay, and I'll just answer a couple couple more to do with behavior change techniques. One's asking about, where is it now? About, does the system allow for behavior change techniques that are not in the V1 taxonomy? And somewhere else, there was a question about whether the behavior change technique taxonomy has been updated. So the answer is that, and you'll hear about this later, as part of the behavior change intervention ontology, the taxonomy has indeed been updated. And there's a published paper that the team can put in the chat, which shows the development process for it. And there's also a preprint of the ontology. So it's around 240 now behavior change techniques. And those are all in the behavior change intervention ontology, and therefore all in the knowledge system. But you'll find out more about that later. And during the tea break, when you come back, you'll find that or whatever kind of break you have, the links to the development paper and the preprint will be up on the chat. And all our papers, nearly all of them, are all published on Welcome Open Research. So just go to the Human Behavior Change project collection there, and you'll see however many dozen or so we've published so far, but we've got quite a lot coming over the next couple of months. So a chair should do two things. One is keep people to time, and the other is introduce speakers. I kept people to time, but I failed to introduce the speakers properly. So we just heard from Professor James Thomas from UCL, who headed our systems architecture work. And the next two sessions are going to be jointly, I think, run by Professor Jana Hastings from two universities, St. Gallen and from Zurich, and Professor Robert West from UCL. Jana leads our computer science work, and Robert is one of the behavioral science team. So good, I have done the introductions properly. And also, just to say thank you very much to our web designers and developers, Silverback IS, who are on the call, saw your comments, and within minutes had harnessed new servers to deal with the overloading problem. So fantastic service, thank you very much. And also to say that the links I mentioned to the development work for the new behavior change technique ontology and the preprint, link to the preprint is up on the chat. But do go to Welcome Open Research, and in about a week, you'll find the new preprint on there, which I'm sure we'll be looking for reviewers too. So if you feel minded to review the paper, that would be great. Excellent, good. So I'm now going to hand over to Jana Hastings, who's going to demonstrate the behavior change intervention ontology search tool and the behavior change intervention ontology visualizing tool. So two things can be done: searching the ontology and visualizing the ontology, and both really important. Jana, thank you very much.
Thanks, Susan. Great. So again, just to say that we will do the session jointly between myself and Robert West, who you see also on the video section. And before we get to visualization, just in case there's anybody on this call who missed the webinars, we're going to have a short prelude to the tools in which we discuss what an ontology actually is and why we sort of structure things in this way for this project. So for those who don't know, ontologies are computable, which means machine readable, and designed in a way that machines can work with them easily. Representations of the types of things that exist in the world, so the sorts of things that we might want to study. And this includes every aspect of scientific investigations and observations that we might make in any topic related to smoking cessation or interventions, behavior change interventions, physical activity, and so on. So the ontology is the, let's say, backbone for representation for use in any computer application. And what it consists of is just a hierarchy of different types of thing in which each entity in the hierarchy is assigned an unambiguous definition, which is really important so people can use the thing in the same way because they have a clear definition for it, and an identifier. And notice that this core content doesn't include a name, because actually many things that we refer to in scientific investigations can be referred to in multiple different ways. So the labels we use to refer to things can be ambiguous. So we assign a kind of unique identifier to a definition. And the hierarchy allows you to have generalized or sort of more specialized views or perspectives on your subject matter. And this structure then allows you to sort of aggregate across lots of different data types or data dimensions in the same way. So this is a really useful thing to do. It's been used, this type of framework has been used in lots of different other disciplines, and it's now becoming more and more sort of widespread, widely used in the behavioral sciences as well. And just to emphasize that the way that the ontology works allows you to use the same representation structure across multiple different data annotations. So that means, you know, a data annotation here, we're talking about a knowledge system. So we're talking about annotations of the primary literature, but you could imagine that there were databases which had nothing to do with research reports, and these could refer usefully to the same things like behavior change techniques, and these then could be annotated and structured with the same ontology. And this actually makes, in the end of the day, putting it all together much easier. So this is the hope, this is the vision, and this is a big part of this project has been to build ontologies for behavioral science. And just, it's worth stopping there and thinking, well, if it's a computable structure, if it's for representation in computers, why should behavioral scientists care? And here I think is where it actually starts to get interesting for everybody, because the need to create this computable structure in a way that it's useful for computers and for multiple different application purposes and for multiple different types of research or use means that you need to get people to sort of agree on what this representation structure should look like. And here is where this gets in actually much more interesting, because the process of trying to get people to agree actually itself can build bridges from one sort of isolated perspective or way of looking at things to another. And these devices, these ontologies can have lots of different ways that they make systems more usable for humans in the end of the day, compared to most purely data-driven structures where it's really just about the technical system. Ontologies are actually kind of human technical synthesis or socio-technical systems, which provide bridges between different perspectives, which provide ways to summarize and to look at things and to cross knowledge boundaries as well as vocabulary boundaries. And I think these things are very interesting, in a way, side effects of the need to create a good representation, which is useful for organizing data. So the behavior change intervention ontology has been developed over the last several years as part of the Human Behavior Change Project, as a kind of core integral part for the purpose of annotating literature and helping to facilitate discovery and question answering and prediction. And it consists of several components. For example, behavior change techniques, which we already heard a little bit about from Susan in the previous session, but also other aspects of intervention delivery, such as the mode of delivery, the schedule of delivery, mechanisms of action, which are how a particular behavior changes, the actual behaviors that you may be studying, such as physical activity, and other aspects of the wider setting, engagement, context, and so on. And this is a schematic of the upper level of the behavior change intervention ontology. So now we're going to have our first demonstration. Professor Robert West is going to give a demonstration of the BCIO search tool, which is a tool that allows you to interact with the behavior change intervention ontology content finding, browsing, and looking things up. So Robert, I think you should be able to share your screen.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, I will. And now we'll discover whether telling everyone that they can go on BCIO search actually crashes the system again. I just got a text from the webmeister saying that what happens is that when the demand exceeds the server load, it brings in new servers, but it takes the system offline very briefly while it does it. So anyway, here we go. So right, BCIO search I think is going to be very much, and BCI visualize are going to be very much your sort of go-to tools here, whether or not you're working in smoking or in other areas, because this is one of the key ways in which you're going to be able to access the ontology and use it. And I'm going to be covering a little bit later our training program, which will go into more detail on how you can use these tools. But essentially, let's say you're writing a paper, or you're writing a description of an intervention, or you're doing some annotation of studies to do a systematic review. And what you want to do is to find a term. And let's take a really simple one to start with and see where it goes. Now, if you just put the term in here, in this search box, then it'll get you so far. It'll be quite good. Let's say you put behavior in. It'll come up with things that have behavior in, like, for example. But at the moment, the way it works is that anything in that box is only things that we've published. So if you want to look a bit more expansively on it, then I suggest you go to the Explore button, and let's put in individual human behavior. And it actually knows that I've already searched that there, and there it is, you can see. And then, so once you've got that, okay, that you say, well, that's actually what I want. Let's click on that to see a bit more about it. And what you'll see is something quite interesting, which is here, you'll see what its parents are. Jana mentioned ontologies. Everything has a parent and a grandparent and an ancestor, all the way going up to a thing called entity, which is literally anything in the world that you could ever possibly imagine. So you don't have to worry too much about those, but but this is very useful because it shows you what kind of a thing individual human behavior is. But then you can look at let's say you've got the definition here. There are no comments here, but if there were comments, they'd be there. But you can also expand that and look in more detail here. And you say individual human behavior, definition, it's got some examples. It's got what kind of thing it's in, and this is again what Jana was referring to here. This is the ID BCIO 006094. Now that ID is completely unique, especially when it's attached to a URL. And this is the fantastic thing about ontologies and what makes them so practically useful. If you copy that link, just click there and it's copied to your clipboard, then you can either copy that into your EndNote or Zotero or Refman, or you can copy it directly into your paper, and that will then reference whatever it is that you're talking about at that time. So it's a way of very easily making absolutely clear to whoever you're talking to or reading, whatever is reading your stuff, what it is that you're referring to. Also, what you'll see here is that where entities are published, we have a system which automatically sends them off. We note them as published. That means they pass certain quality checks. We send them off to this publishing platform called Chaos. It's spelt Quios, but it's pronounced Chaos. And here you'll find the same thing, but it's got a DOI. You see this thing here? That's a DOI. That means it's now counted as a journal article, which means it can be cited very easily as a journal article. But also from our perspective, and from the point of view of the open science that Susan was talking about earlier, you can review it. You can say, actually, I think this definition could be improved in such and such a way. So working with Chaos is a really easy and very sort of transparent way of getting involved in this whole ontology building and development system. So that's the chaos thing. And now I have to go back to where I was before. Actually, I won't go back to where I was before, because I'm going to hand over to Jana, who can take over the visualize, the BCI visualize. Okay, so Jana, do you want to take over?
Okay, so thank you, Robert. I'm going to share my screen again. So first of all, just to say, here's the link. I think it's also in the chat, and I'm going to talk very briefly now about the BCIO Visualize tool. This is a different tool, which is standalone, which allows you to interact with the BCIO in a more overall way rather than single record by single record. So here it is. I can make this now bigger. And you see the interface is really simple. It just has two boxes. One is green. This is for inclusion in the visualization. Another one is red. This is for exclusion in the visualization. And I'm just going to start off with a simple search here for a particular type of entity. So, for example, social support behavior change technique. And what this visualization tool does is it will bring up the branch that starts with the thing you search for and goes down. And this is a really useful feature because often ontologies are really big. So the BCIO itself consists of over 1,000 entities, and it's very difficult to sometimes just sort of get an overview of what is in it. And even from looking at the search tool and finding different parts of it, you may still lack that kind of nuanced overview. So this visualization, I'll just make this a little bit bigger here. Perhaps that makes it easier for you to read. That allows you to see the hierarchy laid out in a sort of, it's automatically laid out, but it tries to maximize the readability of each of the individual classes within the ontology and show their relationships. And so you see here that social support is actually further subdivided into several different types of social support. It's not just one thing, but many potential things. And if we go back and for example, if we wanted to look just for argument's sake at the whole ontology, we could leave this blank, submit again, and now it's going to reload the visualization, but now with the whole ontology. And so you can see, first of all, I'm not sure if you can see much of that, but you can see it's much too big to sort of visualize as a whole in one go, but you could zoom in. And this part of zooming in allows us to also see that you can see different relationships in this visualization and not only the hierarchical or is a relationship. So the hierarchical is a relationship is shown in black, but other relationships are shown in other colors, and they are labeled with the type of relationship that they are. So I think I will stop here at this point, and maybe I'm not sure if our chair allows us time for questions or not, or
Certainly. Now, there are quite a few questions I think that are relevant to this session, and I think the visualization tool is absolutely brilliant, Jana. Well done with it, it's great. Okay, I'm not going just from the top because some of them are very meaty, big questions that we'll have at the end. But this one from MC, will the AI be able to evaluate and conclude that different interventions work more or less effectively with different groups, or will this still be left open to human interpretation and analysis?
So that question a little bit anticipates our prediction.
Okay. Oh yes, of course. Let's leave that then. Where was another one? Okay, there's another one about large populations wanting to predict different demographics that will respond. But I think there's one from Charlotte here about, are you able to search for detail regarding how the intervention was delivered, i.e. therapeutic / interpersonal process, not necessarily what was done, but how?
Yes, so I think here it's we have separate branches in the ontology for the content, the actual intervention, and the delivery and all aspects of the delivery, including both the mode of delivery, which is something like face-to-face as opposed to by the telephone or in an app. But also we've been working on a style of delivery, which relates a lot to sort of communication styles and how people talk in the process of delivering an intervention, which I think is also really important. I don't know, Robert, if you want to add anything to that.
So we have to make a distinction between what we've annotated in the smoking cessation database and what the ontology can allow you to annotate or report, because the ontology is much, it's got over 1,000 entities in it. So, and we've only annotated, well, we've annotated about 100 or so, 100 and something. But as you'll see, the ones that we've used is only about 70 odd. And the reason for that is that we could only really use them for prediction where there were enough examples of them for the machine learning system to be able to use them. So the answer definitely yes when it comes to the ontology and what you can annotate, which is not to say that we've covered everything. And these are organic things, and I would definitely say, if you find an entity that you think is important, and you surely will, and is not in there, then that's what we want you, we want you to contact us, and we will work with you to add it into the ontology. That's the plan. Some of us will, even though some of us are retired.
And I think actually within the published ontology, there is a way of giving feedback, isn't there?
Oh yeah.
Jana, do you want to just say something about that?
Yeah, so I do. So first of all, the ontologies are hosted on GitHub, and GitHub has a kind of issue tracker where you can log requests for additions or comments or suggestions, and we will action them in a newer release of the ontology. I also wanted to mention our sort of related effort, Behavioral and Social Science Ontology Foundry, which is a community of interoperable ontologies working together within the behavioral sciences more broadly. So this includes the behavior change intervention ontology, but also some ontologies contributed by other behavioral scientists. And this Behavioral and Social Science Ontology Foundry has a mailing list which you can sign up to and allow for exchanges and discussions among about topics related to ontologies.
Thanks. Okay, a couple more that I think are relevant here. Would you want the BCIO ID codes to be added to any publication or only primary and secondary research?
Robert?
Quite sure how to interpret that.
Well, I'll tell you what I want, what I think should happen is that I think, look, we need to up our game a little bit, in our field and become a bit more sort of rigorous and scientific. And so I think when there's any possibility of any doubt about what it is you're talking about, which is just about all the time when we use words, then it doesn't hurt, to be clear about it in terms of giving an ID. And what we need with journals is to make that a little bit easier. Now, Chaos already has this facility where all you do, because it was actually set up by someone who was fed up with the ambiguity of language, and that's why he introduced this thing of having definitions in there, which is why it's so wonderful to work with them. But basically, all you have to do is you have a word, and it can be any word you like. You can use whatever term you like, but you just simply give it a link to the ontology term in the paper. And it's really easy, and I think it'd be really great when other journals follow suit, which I'm sure they will. But for the moment, what I would say is that for all your key constructs, all the things that you're really are important in your paper, whether it's your predictors, the components of an intervention, delivery, and so on, setting, all the things that you would want discoverable when someone's doing evidence synthesis using your work, so outcome measures, side effects, inclusion criteria, all of that, then why not? Just simply have a link there to the ontology ID. And if there isn't one, which this is really early days, if there isn't one, then there isn't one, and that's just where we are, and hopefully that will then help we become remedied. But where we can, I think, yeah, that's what I would like, and I hope to set a good example on that in the future.
Thank you. And Harriet Baird asked, what is the rationale for having separate databases for each behaviour? So I don't think we have separate databases for each behaviour. Certainly in terms of the ontology, it's all part of the ontology. And in fact, the behaviour ontology should be published, or at least as preprint, next month. And I think that's going to be a very exciting contribution to it. I mean, as a psychologist, the behaviour change technique ontology, the mechanisms of action ontology, and the behaviour ontology are the three that I think are really, really going to help, or those components of the BCIO. But in terms of separate databases for each behaviour, Robert or Jana, do you want to say something?
Yeah, so I think this is, I mean, we have separate databases of sort of literature annotations in a way, right? So we have smoking cessation as our first case study. And in a way, this is oriented around, rather than separate behaviors, it's more separate outcomes in a way. So the at the moment, the prediction system is oriented around predicting outcomes in a single outcome way. And I think also the study finding tool, the way that it works is distinguished based on topic or subject of the review. So there are some separate pieces of the puzzle, but I think the objective is to build this in a way so that in the future these can be more closely integrated and the tools will serve multiple behaviors.
Okay, thanks. And again, an anonymous one here. How useful and necessary is a structured ontology with the recent rise of large language models? Are they compatible? Good question. Janet, do you want to start off with that one?
Yeah, I can start off. So I think we live in really interesting times. I think a few years ago, the language models were really stupid, and now they are something resembling useful, which is really, really nice. But unfortunately, language models suffer with the same problems that language that humans use suffer from. That is, it's not as clear or unambiguous what's being referred to in a given passage of text. So we still need this kind of disambiguating reference where we are really clear about definitions. But I think that language models will help accelerate the automation part to be sure that we are not wasting time doing things that are tedious. This is my view. Robert, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think they're two different sort of channels of progress in AI and machine learning. They're coming together. They will come together, but at the moment they're separate channels. Language models tell you what people are saying about stuff. What we're doing is telling you what the data is saying about stuff, and that's very different. As and when generative AI gets involved in data, then okay, that may well change. But actually, as things stand at the moment, machine learning and statistical type models do a pretty good job. You'll see later, just in a few minutes, when Jana explains the rule-based machine learning system we've used. They can do a really good job at making predictions from data, which language models just, it's not even their thing. They can tell you what people said, and if two different people said different things, they get a bit confused, as you'll see if you put, even into elicit, which is a very good academic sort of generative AI system. So I think these, what we're going to head towards is some combination, some bringing together of the clever language model type stuff, which can interpret human language to make a prediction, but it'll draw on the sort of stuff that hopefully we're developing, which is based on data.
Great, good answers. Thanks very much. Just before we move on to the outcome prediction tool, there are a couple of questions here I think I can deal with quite quickly. One asks about fidelity. The fidelity component of the ontology is going to be one of the last to be published. I think it should be published in the summer, August sort of time. And then there's also a question about the theory and techniques tool. Says it's a great tool for inspiration on what kinds of techniques can work when specific facilitators of behavior change have been identified. However, it says it's out of date. Are there plans to update it to include the full range of BCTs and new MOAs developed by the project? Great question. And yes, so what we're doing is mapping the 93 techniques from BCT TV1 over to the techniques in the ontology. And in fact, that is already done. And that's there in an appendix. I think not in the original preprint you've got, but when you go, I'm not sure, I think it may not be, but certainly when you go onto the Welcome Open Research one, hopefully it'll be posted any day now. And if you sign up for the final newsletter on our website, then you get details when it comes up. But we'll be doing exactly the same thing for mechanisms of action. And so what you'll be able to do is be able to use the theory and techniques tool for those techniques and those mechanisms that were specified originally, but are now in with the IDs, the new IDs of the equivalent in the new ontology. So I hope that helps. And also, I'm just going to ask the team if they can put in the chat the link for if you want to sign up for what will probably be our final newsletter coming up, but then we will also be able to say exactly what papers are coming out when, and we'll include the link to the BCT ontology new preprint and Welcome Open Research, which will be, as I say, posted any day now. Okay, so moving on with the same speakers, we have a presentation and demonstration of the outcome prediction tool, and we already have some questions relevant to that, which is great. Over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Susan. So we're going to talk a little bit quite briefly about the theory behind the outcome prediction tool, or what we were trying to do with that. So just sort of recap, we have these ontologies which we've developed, the behavior change intervention ontology as an overarching structure, lots of sub-ontologies, and we're using these to annotate the primary literature as part of sort of data extraction, and this allows us to do evidence synthesis in the end in a kind of dynamic way. And you can see here examples, face-to-face, this corresponds to face-to-face mode of delivery, smartphone app, this corresponds to mobile application mode of delivery. So these would be annotations which are done from the ontology to literature, but then the data table which is extracted based on these ontologies can be used as an input to other data-driven modes of integrating the sort of evidence across the body of literature. So we wanted to develop a system which was able to make predictions of outcomes in hypothetical intervention scenarios, not only synthesize the evidence that there is, because there may be some aspects of the intervention that you are curious about for which there is no evidence, or for which the evidence that you have has to be extrapolated to a new scenario. So in order to provide question answering, which is based on the evidence, we wanted a predictive system rather than just a data-driven evidence synthesis system. So the idea here is that we have some data which is extracted from the literature, and we feed this into a machine learning model. And we want the model to be based on the categories which we have annotated in the ontology. This is how data is extracted from the literature. We want the system to be interpretable, because a prediction for purposes of determining which would be the best policy is no use if you can't tell what the prediction is based on, right? So black box machine learning methods are really not applicable here, because then they cannot faithfully explain their predictions. They're opaque, you can't tell. So we aimed to develop a machine learning approach based on this data and the ontology, and have it be interpretable. So we decided to go with a rules-based system. Rules-based systems are a kind of old-fashioned, in a way, form of artificial intelligence. They were underlying the original expert systems, which were popular in the 90s. And they have the advantage of being quite naturally interpretable. You can, they map quite closely onto how humans understand explanations for things. We think in terms of if this, then that. And there are approaches which can induce rules-based systems from example data, and they have a quite easy approach to integrate them with ontology-based semantics, logical structures, and so on. So these are the advantages, but there were also some disadvantages with the traditional rules-based systems. Some aspects relating to the structure of the rules needed to be relatively short and have relatively few of them, because otherwise it just becomes too much information, and actually, even though it's in principle transparent, you still cannot really interpret it. And another aspect was this, that the traditional rules-based systems were not trainable using modern efficient machine learning approaches. So we developed a system which took the, I think, best features of the historical systems, but worked in a more modern way. And this, I won't go into this detail, but this is the system which we developed. Very briefly, the system learns from data in order to sort of understand which rules it needs to have. And it learns using a modern learning algorithm, same as are used in deep neural networks, but the system isn't deep. It just consists of a set of rules. And the rules are then available to be used in the prediction system as a model. I skip over this as well, just we did some validations showing that the system performed equally well as deep neural networks and better than other explainable explainable AI approaches. And in the end, you get out a system of rules which are additive. So the rules, there's a system of rules, there's more than one rule. Each rule which applies based on the features that you select in your prediction system gives you some impact on the outcome prediction that you're making. And these impacts are then added up to get your final prediction. So now I will hand back to Robert, who will do a prediction demonstration. This is exciting.
Yes. It's taken me a while over the course of this project to really get a sense of how novel this is. And you know, many of you, some of you I know on this this webinar are interested in smoking cessation, and you'll know that when we're trying to advise policymakers and practitioners about, for example, cost effectiveness of interventions and so on, we can't directly use the Cochrane reviews and so on, because they give you odds ratios and rate ratios which compare X intervention with a control or a comparison. They don't directly predict the outcome. And that's really hard to say, if in this context, with this population, with this setting, with this intervention, with these ingredients, what proportion are going to be still abstinent at 6 months after the quit date? That's a really hard thing to do, because you've got to do that, you've got to have all the information available to even work with. And then you've got to have a really clever machine learning system like the one that Jana and colleagues have developed to make the best use of that. But anyway, this is what we've got, and it really is novel. So what you've got is in this system is the sort of it still needs a little bit of work in terms of the presentation, because some of the writing is very, very small, but you'll see the basic idea is that on the top here, you've got information that you can put in about your population. So what's their mean age of the population, or your treatment population, whatever it might be, what proportion are female, what's their cigarette consumption, average cigarette consumption, and what sort of follow-up are you interested in? 26 weeks, which is pretty standard, or 52 weeks, or 12 weeks, or whatever. And then you can add some other bits of information about your patient population. For example, your population, are they patients, for example, hospital patients or outpatients? And has there been biochemical verification? And are you interested in continuous abstinence from the date that they set the quit date all the way through to the follow-up, or point prevalence, as it's called, which is just, are they abstinent at the follow-up point? And you can set all this. And then if you don't put anything on the left-hand side here about the intervention, If then what it will do is it'll come up with a rule which will say if you're in the control condition in that situation, in this case it's predicting that your 26-week continuous abstinence rate for a population with the average cigarette consumption of 10, mean age 50, with 50% women is 4.3, which is actually pretty. That's what I would expect to be something like that. And here, you would have to expand your screen if you're doing this yourself to be able to read it really clearly. But you can actually see all the rules that have been learnt that tells you how it came to that conclusion. And the ones that are related to the green bars are ones which push the success rate up, and the ones which are the red bars are all the rules which are pushing it down. What you'll also notice, and this is very interesting as a researcher, is that even if you've got nothing in the intervention, because we haven't put anything here yet, it still thinks the intervention group of such a study would have an outcome of around 7. Now, there'll be loads of reasons for that, but one of them we happen to know is a very important one, and that is that in the published reports of smoking cessation interventions, and this is not true for smoking cessation, it's true for all behavioral interventions, and Marijn de Bruin has done some brilliant work, looking at this, is that there's a lot of stuff in there that never gets mentioned. In other words, it may look as though there's nothing in the intervention group, but the very fact that it's there in the intervention group, it means that there's stuff in there that hasn't been reported in the paper, which actually is raising their quit rate. Now, there can be other reasons as well, but that we know is an important one. So you just have to bear in mind that all of these data here are going to have to be seen through the filter of what people have reported in their studies, and which is one of the reasons why it's so important, and we'll come to this later, that we up our game in terms of what we're reporting in the studies, because this is basically unexplained variance. Okay, but having said that, let's see what happens if we start to add some components in. And let's say, and these are the ones that were common enough in the 500 or so articles, randomized trials, about 1,000 different conditions that we coded up. Let's say we've got to get some problem solving in there, we'll get some goal setting, let's put a bit of pharmacological support in there, and let's look at what happens if we help with reducing negative emotions. When it comes to pharmacological support, if you tick that box, if you scroll down here, you can say that it'll ask you, well, what kind of pharmacological support? And it defaults to placebo, which is not going to be much use. But let's take NRT for the sake of argument. And let's see what you come up with. Okay, well, what's happened, you'll see, is it does this live as you're doing it. It's upped the quit rate from whatever it was, 7 to about nearly 13%, which again, to me looks, it passes the Robert West expert view test. It looks pretty close, and it tells you what kind of things that it's using there, what kind of rules it's coming up with. But what we haven't said is how the delivery is. So, okay, well, what if we say it's face-to-face? Does that make a difference? Yes, it does. So if you don't have face-to-face like that, this is a great difference between a machine learning model like this and a regression model. If in this machine learning model, if you don't put the variable in, then it'll say, okay, well, I just don't know. You're just asking me what, it could be any kind of delivery. It's being agnostic about it. But if you put it in, then it'll say, okay, now I know that it's face-to-face. This is what I think the situation is. And let's also then say, well, we haven't specified, it's like we're agnostic about who's delivering this. Well, let's say it's a doctor. Does that make any difference? Yes, it does. It bumps it up to about almost 19%. So you can mess around with this, and you can see, what things bump it up, what things take it down, and so on. And you can start to build a picture of the outcomes for your various different components of the intervention. And then, and this relates to a question that was asked a bit earlier, you can say, well, okay, is it different if you've got all women or all men, or if it's a younger age or a older age population? And because it's a machine learning system that integrates this information in combinations of rules, it has the opportunity, if it's there in the data, to tell you whether particular types of intervention, typical blends of intervention, are more likely to be effective in different scenarios. So for example, let's say if we said, let's take the age down, no, let's take the proportion female up all the way up to 100%. What happens? Okay, well, the overall quit rate has gone up a little bit, and and nothing much has happened to the control. So you can see, actually, it didn't make a lot of difference whether it was 100% women or 50% women. But what if it's 0% women? What does that do? Is that okay? Well, you can see, actually, if it's 0% women, then the overall success rate goes up. The control condition is now 7.57. The intervention condition is about 22. Anyway, you can mess around with it yourselves, but I hope you can see, for me, as a smoking researcher, this is quite exciting, because this is the first time ever, I know Susan's trying to stop me talking. This is the first time ever that we've been able to be in a position to make these kinds of predictions with this caveat, which is this is based on randomized controlled data with all of the stuff, that the caveats that have to apply to that.
Thanks, Robert. So we're just going a bit over time, so I wanted to get in so we could get some questions. And also to say, we had a great comment by Tom Webb, and I tried to answer it. And in answering it, I managed to kind of delete it somehow, but I've asked the team to get it back up there. So Tom was talking about work that they're doing, Tom Webb, in Sheffield, and was suggesting we integrate what they're doing with what we're doing, which is a great idea. So anyway, I hope we get it back up again so that everybody can see it. So sorry about that. Me and technology don't get on. Okay, Ian Keller. Hi, Ian. In the prediction tool, will there be a means of automating the identification of the most efficacious combination of BCTs, behavior change techniques? Robert, Jana.
Yeah, I would like to start. So I think this is, once you have a model, then sort of exploring all possible permutations for a given population becomes an additional layer on top of that model, which is relatively easy to compute. I would love to say we had done it already, but we haven't, just by virtue of time and resources, but it's definitely quite high on the list of things that we want to explore now, basically.
Yeah, right at the beginning of this project, it certainly was our intention and our vision to have a recommender system. So this is a prediction system, but if you turn this into a recommender system, it says, I've got X% women, this is what my population looks like. What are your best bets here? Now, it's worth bearing in mind that such a system ought to really give you a range of options, because there are other constraints that you have to take into consideration when you're developing an intervention, like cost, for example, or practicality. Say, well, I can't do a face-to-face intervention, so now what? So it's a bit more complicated than just simply what's the best thing, but it's definitely doable, and I think that's the next step.
Thanks. And now the one that I tried to ask before, but we thought it would be more useful under this one, this session. Say you have a large population using your intervention and you want to predict how different demographics will respond. Can you do that? So instead of specifying middle-aged women, you say all people, and then can see the breakdown across age, gender, etc.
So I think this is close to what the prediction system can do, but the difference is that the interface requires you to sort of choose. So you can explore iteratively different age ranges and see what impact that has on prediction. But you can't say ignore age altogether with the current interface. And this is something which, of course, it would be nice to think about how to add in the future. But yeah, I don't know, Robert, if you want to add.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically that, how we've chosen to do the interface, where you, on the left-hand side with the interventions, it can be agnostic about what the mode of delivery is, but it can't be agnostic about what the age distribution is. But the model can be. So it's purely what we decided to do. how useful that would be, I'm not 100% sure. But if it turns out that that's a good use case, then it's not a hard thing to implement.
Okay. Will the AI be able to evaluate and conclude that different interventions work more or less effectively with different groups, or will this still be left open to human interpretation and analysis? So that's exactly what this knowledge system is set up to do. If you think about the big question I put up at the beginning, it's one of the real drivers, inspirers of this project is to be able to look at what's the outcome for different groups and different settings, for different behaviors, etc. Different sources of the intervention. And this is much too complicated and much too data poor to do this manually. You hardly ever can get these kind of interactions. So this is exactly what the knowledge system is set up to be able to do. Don't know if you want to add anything or whether we can squeeze one more question in.
Yeah, I would just say that the more data we get, the more we sort of accumulate and scale up the annotations, the knowledge resources, and so on, the better we'll get at being able to do these things in a data-driven way. And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah. Okay, Misha Costa asks, how are differences in effectiveness between behavior change techniques integrated? Is there, for instance, a weighting factor assigned to each intervention in a certain context?
So I think here it's really about what the machine learning model has learned from the data or has been able to learn from the data. So in some cases, it learns only a single sort of effect of a given feature, like an intervention feature. And in other cases, it learns interactions between features and context. So both possibilities exist, and whichever will have the more dominant effect in the data set is what gets favored.
Yeah, so it's empirical, really. You don't start with well, I think this is going to be more effective, and therefore that gets weighted higher. It's whatever the system learns, really.
Yeah.
And then Ian Keller says, what is happening when adding multiple sources and multiple delivery types? I think that's the same as what Robert was demonstrating with multiple behavior change techniques. You can do that.
Yeah, exactly. You can add as many as you want. Susan, I would just come back to the comment by Thomas Webb. So it is actually visible in the Q&A in the Answered tab, and maybe we can just...
right. Okay, good.
So
excellent. Yeah, Janet, do you want to read that out and speak to it?
Yeah, so he says, the outcome prediction tool is great. My hope for the future is that we can integrate with tools that we are developing, the Turbo tools, which he includes a link for, which aim to predict effects of interventions on multiple behaviors, including potential spillover/compensation, e.g. intervention X reduces smoking by Y, but increases consumption of caffeinated/soft drinks by Z. And I think this is a really interesting idea, which our current system theoretically and architecturally could include, but we haven't got data for at the moment. But maybe this is a really exciting direction for the future. I don't know, Robert, if you have a thought to add to this.
This is the future. I mean, we're very, I mean, it's understandable because of the technology, but, we're very siloed in, we think, well, we've got this intervention and we've got this behavior, and we're going to look at the effect of this intervention on this behavior.
Yeah.
But but what about other behaviors, that are going on at the same time? And once you embrace this idea about being able to put this into a large knowledge system like this, then anything is possible. You could say, well, actually, if you do this, okay, you might then, get a reduction in smoking by X, but you're going to get an increase in some other behavior by Y, or you might benefit from getting also a reduction in that behavior. And now it's a whole different ball game. You're now really back, really into proper systems thinking, which is what we're looking for. And
I'd like to just mention, it was mentioned earlier about a webinar series we've done. For those who don't know, we've this is the finale after 14 webinars that go into the underpinning and the rationale and the background to a lot of the work we're talking about today. So if anybody would like to look in more detail, all those 14 webinars are now on the Human Behaviour Change Project YouTube channel. So you can find them there and then dip into the ones that you're most interested in. And hopefully in the chat, a link can be put for the YouTube channel. Okay, the next session is going to be on the paper authoring tool. And this arose from our experiences of trying to code and annotate the papers to put into the database. And those of you who have done this kind of work will just know how frustrating it is, because same terms used for different things, different terms used for the same things that are missing, the order of things is all over the place, things might be referred to in different ways at different points of the article. So Robert had the brilliant idea to make an ontology-based template to cut out the middle person of the author in terms of the more maybe anarchistic writing style. So it's not to say that one can't write papers, but that one has a skeleton of absolutely key information that needs to go into the paper linked to the entities in the ontology and then the definitions. So I won't say anything more than that. I'll hand over to Robert, who'll present that, and then we'll have some questions, and then finally he'll introduce the training program for the behaviour change intervention on ontology. But this is the paper authoring tool. Robert.
Thank you. So the paper authoring tool is something that's been around for a few years now, and is constantly being updated and developed, and will continue to be so. As Susan said, one of the big rationales for it, or motivations for it, was I guess concern over the fact that either crucial information is not in the reported paper or the study report, or it's presented in a way that isn't usable or discoverable. So what is the paper authoring tool then? Well, it's a free online tool for writing up randomized trials and pilot trials. In due course, it's certainly been on our books, and I've said this before, some of you have probably heard me say this, that we plan to extend it to other forms of study, such as quasi-experimental designs and surveys and lots and lots of other designs. But of course, that takes resources. So at the moment, we're focused on RCTs and pilot trials. And what it does is really very simple. It's the sort of thing you really want done, which is it prompts the user for all the information needed. So it kind of, in a way, as a user, it takes the pressure off, because when you're starting to write up a paper, even with things like the consort guidelines and so on, it's quite daunting. But with the paper authoring tool, you've got somewhere to start, because it will prompt you for all the information that you need to put in. It then stores that information and uses it to create a Word file, and also, very importantly, a machine-readable, what's known as a JSON file, which is just a sort of semi-structured or a structured database, which is portable across lots of different data types, so it can be used by lots and lots of different systems. And I'll show you that in a minute. But then crucially, as Susan has pointed out, it allows the user to enter unique identifiers for all of the key constructs that are in it. So that if you can imagine now, fast forward to when everyone's using this tool or something like it, where every paper has a machine readable version with all the ontologized data in it, no one needs to annotate anything ever again. It's all done. It's all immediately full text, full information, all immediately available. You don't have to do a title search, abstract search or anything. It's all there. Can you imagine where, how things could move forward if we had that? Well, this is a start, hopefully. So why do we need this? Well, as Susan said, evidence synthesis is enormously difficult at the moment because of the way we do things, but also it's just really hard writing up randomized trials. And it's also incredibly inefficient. As editor of a journal, and having done many, many randomized trials myself, I'm only too familiar with the fact that even in very, very experienced trialists find it hard. It's very inefficient. It takes lots and lots of goes at it. And journals very often miss key things when they're reviewing papers, so that information's missing when it arrives. So paper authoring tool, we try to make it as simple as we can, and I'm sure there's more we can do to make it simpler. But essentially, you've got the PAT website, which is paperauthoringtool.com. And if you go onto it, you should be able to, if you haven't registered, just register and then sort of start using it, and hopefully you won't crash it so that I can carry on with the demonstration. But I'm told by the web people that they've spun up loads more servers. So go to the PAT website, register as an author, you start your paper, you invite your co-authors, and off you go. And the key part of it is use these what's known as wizards to enter the information. And I'll just give you a quick demo of that. And then at any time, you can preview the paper, save it as a JSON file, and then save it as a Word file. You can just do that anytime you like. So I'm just going to go now onto the demo and show you what I mean. Let's just... what I'll do is I will come out of that, and I will go into this, and here's the a paper that's already been started. So if I were to log out, you'd be able to see that I can, how you register and so on. We did have a system, by the way, for those of you who've tried to log in and had an issue with the emails coming through, that we sort of sidestepped that so that you're automatically registered once you go through the registration process. You can look at your papers at any time. But anyway, if I click on this tab here, you'll see all the wizards. And there are the wizards relating to the paper metadata and abstract and all that sort of stuff. Ones relating to the introduction, methods, results, discussion, and conclusions, and so on. Now, with this particular paper, this is a simple two-arm randomized trial. I'll just take you through a couple of things, and then you can, and then we can go to questions and answers. But if you go to the abstract, for example, these are the fields that you can just enter stuff in, and it will put it in the paper for you. But this is also where you can say what your study groups are. And actually, you can have as many study groups as you like. It says 4 there, but we've expanded it to an infinite number of study groups. And you give them a label. You can edit that. And you have a short label, which is very important. You can have an acronym, which we often use. You can have a long label, a description. And it also asks you whether it's a control group. And that will allow it, when it comes to presenting your data, to prompt you for crucial information about whether you're in an intervention or a control group. And so you put all that in like that. Now, as I say, at any time you can preview the paper. And this is what it looks like if you preview it. And you can see that it just looks like a sort of standard paper, but you'll see there are bits in red there, which are prompts for bits that are missing. So if you've got lots of missing stuff there, well, hang on a minute, I better do something about that. You can also export the Word document into a nice, nicely formatted document like this. And you'll see that it comes up, it's all nicely done for you in the sort of way that a journal would want it. And it does mean that all the sort of, boring stuff, author contributions, financial support and all that is all there in the kind of way that a journal would want it. And I'll just show you very quickly what the JSON file looks like so you can see what the computer will see. And this is computer speak. But the thing is here, you can see it's sort of structured. You could get a sense of what the structure looks like. But the crucial thing is that literally all the information that you've put in is there in a machine readable form. So I'm just going to finish by showing you how you would ontologize your paper. And let's look, for example, at your constructs and measures. This is the bit where you specify what you're including in your study, what you're measuring, and what you're doing with them. And let's take something like the cigarette dependence here. Now, crucially, what the paper authoring tool forces you to do is to make a distinction between the construct, in this case, cigarette dependence, and the measure of the construct. Now, often they're the same thing because we don't bother to say what kind of a measure we had of age or whatever. But for many things, we do need to make that distinction. And it's really important because they're not the same thing. So if you go to that and you edit it, what you'll see is for the construct, you can say, do you want to associate this with an ontological term? Now, at the moment in the paper authoring tool, it'll provide you, if you want, with a link to what's known as the ontology lookup service, which is where the BCIO is also located, so that you can grab stuff from there. And the reason for that is that this paper authoring tool is not just for behavioral trials, but it's for clinical trials of any kind. And so there may be ontology terms from other ontologies that people want to use. But if you just wanted to use the BCIO terms, you could either do it from the OLS or you just copy, I showed you how to do that in BCIO search. You just click on copy onto clipboard, the URL, and you shove it in here. And there it is. That's it, done. And it'll actually tell you what kind of a thing it is, and it'll tell you about the definition. And you can do that with all of your constructs and all of your measures. Now, measures at the moment are not included in the BCIO because we just haven't had the time to do that. But ultimately, they will all be there. But all the constructs are there. And that option is there for pretty well everything that you want to include in the ontology, including, for example, if you're just wanting to talk about your intervention, you actually got an even more structured thing. You can actually select from behavior change techniques in the BCTV1 taxonomy, and you can put those in there if you like. And it prompts you for all of this other stuff as well. So I will stop there. There's a lot to, obviously, it's a very big program, and there's a lot to sort of say about it, but it should give you an idea about what it involves. And I shall hand over to Susan if there's any questions.
Thanks. I mean, I think it's really cool to write a paper where basically you're just being prompted and you just put in information and then you press a button and basically you've got the skeleton of the paper all well organized and all the things that you should have in there. And also very helpful for designing studies, writing protocols to ensure that you've got everything in there. There are a couple of specific questions, Robert. The first is, can you format according to the specific requirements of the journal, word count, ordering, headers, etc.?
Yeah, in your dreams.
Well,
no,
if journals were all open science, it'd be a lot easier.
Oh, it would. No, I mean, it's what a terrific idea. And wouldn't it be wonderful if publishers sort of got on board with this and actually then you took your generic one, a bit like with EndNote or Reference Manager, and they provided templates which would automatically put it in the form that they want. But I think we're quite a long way away from that. Fortunately, many of the journal publishing is still in the dark ages. I would say that many of the good open access journals are already pretty good on this. The worst journals, in my experience, are ones like the New England Journal and the Lancet, that have their own idiosyncratic styles, like having to put full stops halfway up the line, for example, for no obvious reason.
Okay, let's stick to topic. Okay, I'll hurry on to another question. From Rosalie Southwell, will the use of this tool be cited in the methodology section of future studies?
Yes, I would. What I suggest, and there's a couple of papers now being published using the tool, and what I would at least one's in the journal Addiction, what I suggest is just a simple line which says this paper was prepared using the paper authoring tool. Now, it's worth bearing in mind that you can, and it would be wonderful if people did, use the tool for the whole paper. Right? You just do everything in the paper, but you don't have to. that's quite daunting for some people because, you know, for example, a lot of the information they haven't actually collected. So it would have, if they'd used the tool to design the study, then we would have been in a better position. But anyway, you're not. But what you can do is you could use the tool for any part of the paper, like your results tables, for example, or your research question. It's got a really cool research question builder in there, or your intervention description. So, you know, if you can use it as minimally or as maximally as you want, and whatever you do put in will go in the JSON file, and you can put in your supplementary file to make it easy for people to find the ontologized information. So that's the idea.
I'm not sure if you already said it, but the vision is to extend this for lots of different kinds of study designs in the future. There's a general question about ontologies, but since this tool is ontology based, I'll read it out, and it's specifically addressed to you, Robert. You appear to believe that the ontology will be completely neutral in its presentation of results, but do you think that its design must inevitably have some element of bias, however implicit? And that's from MC.
I don't think ontologies are neutral because knowledge isn't neutral, and the ontology is what's known as a realist ontology, which doesn't mean that it thinks that everything in the ontology is the real world. What it means is there is a real world, and the ontology is a representation of it. But we all know that there's lots of different potential perspectives that you can adopt to a particularly nuanced and complex subjects such as human behavior. And so but the idea then of using an ontology is that it can embrace and encompass different perspectives just by being explicit about what that perspective is. So it's entirely feasible for someone to say, well, I've got this particular view of stress or this particular construct, and there would be an ontology term for that, and so you could express that and it would be absolutely clear what it was you're referring to. So ontologies are not intended to constrain the way that you conceptualize things, but rather to enable people to fully precisely describe what that perspective and that conceptualization is. Having said that, you know, the whole of our sort of a way that we look at the world is constrained by our culture and so on. And one of the things I think we have to be very sensitive to is the fact that this is, you know, we are Western at a particular point in time. And so we always have to be looking at how we can expand our perspective so that we can be more comprehensive and precise.
Thanks, Robert. Okay, so probably you'll have gathered that the world of ontologies is wonderful, but not totally simple and straightforward. So we're very keen to develop a training program for the behaviour change intervention ontology. And Robert will now introduce that. Robert, over to you.
I shall do that. I shall go to sharing my screen. Right, so the world of ontologies is somewhat complicated and takes a bit of getting your head around. So we are developing this training program, and we've so far developed 7 modules, and I'm just going to take you through it very briefly. Why have we developed this training program? Ontologies are, I guess, more and more people now are familiar with them, but I would still say it's a small minority of researchers. The language can look very technical and can be very technical, so it's good to be able to explain that. If we think of it, you know, rather like statistics or qualitative research, or you know, it's another area where there is some technical knowledge that needs to be got across. The BCIO itself is actually a very advanced, in many ways, ontology. It has novel features that you won't see in other ontologies. And we also have tried very much to apply ontological principles to the development of it that aren't always present in other ontologies. And in any case, you know, it's helpful to see how tools are used. So that's basically why we've developed it. You can access it through the BCI ontology website or indirectly from the HBCP website. And you can actually access it directly. It's all on YouTube. And if you go to the Human Behavior Change Project channel on YouTube, this is the channel here. And if you go YouTube at Human Behavior Change Project, that should bring up the channel. You'll be able to see the first 7 modules that have been prepared. And each module consists of a video, which will be somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes. And if you go to the description below the module, it contains links to a resources document here, and also a very short quiz to help sort of test your understanding of what's there. So I'm going to now just give you a quick demonstration, going to the YouTube video, and so you can see what it looks like. I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute so that I can see the bit that I have to see in order to be able to share it. Okay. So this is the YouTube channel here, and it's the Human Behavior Change Project channel. And on the channel, if you go to the home part of it, you just get this bit here and me introducing the channel. You can go to the videos, but what you really want to do is go to the playlists. And there's 3 playlists at the moment. One is the training program, one is the webinar series, which, as Susan mentioned earlier, with all 14 webinars. And the other one, for those of you interested in behavioral science archaeology, is what we said we were going to do at the beginning of the Human Behavior Change Project in the launch event all the way back in 2016. So if I just go to the training program here, you'll see here are the 7 videos, and you've got the video here, and you've got the description, which has links to the resources document, which I can put up for you here. Having done that, I then can't get back to the screen, but you basically get the idea. So each of the videos is short, should be pretty easy to access, and it'll cover the sort of basics of getting into the ontology. But we've got a program, I think so far we've got about 15 videos planned, covering everything. But if there's something that you think would be really useful for us to do, then just let us know, and we'll try and do a training module on that. And I think that's it for the training program.
Robert, do you want to just give the titles of the 7 that we have recorded so far?
Oh, yes, I can do that, actually. That's a good point. Let me share my screen again.
And if it's easy, you could also mention the ones that are coming up.
That's not, yes, it is. It's not so hard. I reckon I can probably do that. Right, let me figure out how to do that. Hang on a sec.
And when Robert said, contact us, on the website, there's details about how to contact us. So, do contact us about anything that you think could be improved on the website, or in terms of what we are presenting there. Okay, here we go. Thanks.
Yeah, so these are the 7 we've done. So Jana has done one on what are ontologies and why they're useful. Then Mary did one on how can they be used in behavioral science. And then I've done an introduction to the behavior change intervention ontology and its components. And then we have, what is the BCIO? Then one on its components, and then one on the tools, search tool, visualize tool. Then we've got one on that Susan's done. No, Mary's done this one, hasn't it?
Never mind.
Anyway, on specifically focusing on interventions and their context, and then developing that a bit further and actually showing how to describe them. So those are the 7 that we've done so far.
Okay, do you have the other ones easy to hand? If not, doesn't matter.
We'll
Probably
pass
not.
on that. because
Okay.
I'd have to find another document.
Okay, so in terms of question and answers, let me just see if there's anything. No, I don't think it's a kind of question answering thing, but we're dead on time, which is miraculous, which gives us 20-25 minutes for a general Q&A, which Professor Mary Johnston from Aberdeen University will be facilitating, and then I'll have 6-7 minutes at the end just to wrap things up. So thank you, Robert. And thank you, Mary, for hosting this next part of the session. And oh, actually, we should all come back on, shouldn't we? So Jana and James, if you want to join us, that'd be great.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to take the questions in the order in which they've been upticked. So the first one is about how do you statistically adjust for the effect of adding multiple BCTs, which in studies act as clusters, which may be shown to be more effective, as opposed to the specific independent additive or interactive effects. Do you want to answer that, Jana?
Well, I can start. Basically, we're not adjusting for these within the model that we have at the moment. So it is able to learn individual variable or interactions between variables, but I think multiple clusters is, yeah, it's not something which we have. Yeah, at some point, the model doesn't have enough data to learn from at the moment, in any case.
Yeah, I think in a way, I was going to have a more positive response to that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, because it's a machine learning model and not a regression model, it'll find whatever patterns it can, and it'll interpret those in terms of rules. I think that what Jana's referring to is the fact that because although 500 studies and 1,000 arms seems like a lot, in machine learning terms, it's actually not much at all. And what it means is that you can imagine it'd be very hard to learn very complex interactions. And so rather than allow the model to find complex interactions, which may be utterly spurious, we've limited it to the length of the rules and the types of rules that it can learn, so it doesn't learn a whole bunch of stuff that's just noise. So to that extent, it's only going to pick up, I mean, it is picking up interactions, but it's not picking up, really high level interactions. Would that be fair, Jana?
Yeah, and I think this is something where if we had sort of all the data of all the studies, we could really aim to level up in that way, I think.
Okay, if we come on to the next question, I think this is one for you, Susan. It's been partially addressed already. To what extent will our shared language reflect the concerns of the most dominant groups in society and globally? Will we be able to give fair representation to the serious concerns of minority groups and countries?
Well, there's been a huge amount, hasn't there, in the last, even the last few weeks, about the ethical aspects of large language models and what they're doing. And as has been said before, I mean, what they're working with is scraping the entire web for everything that's been written about everything. And so it reflects what has been written. And I suppose when one says most dominant groups, there's lots of ways of interpreting that. Because, there's those who have most power in society, but there's also those who spend a lot of time producing words, especially on social media, that get picked up. So, one real concern is about misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation where people get it wrong, disinformation where it's on purpose. And that's happening in many different areas. And I think the concern is that this is going to happen a lot more. And the more that people use large language models and use the material that's produced by them, the more it becomes a sort of self-fulfilling mechanism. So, yeah, I think there's a great danger. And I think the key thing is to actually think about, yes, we can predict these and many other kinds of problems, rather than sit back and say, these problems are problems, is what can we do to limit them? And the you know, as I'm sure everybody on this call knows, many of the leading voices in AI have been calling for a moratorium in terms of going forward until governments can produce regulations that says what isn't allowed and how to regulate all of this. So I think that's very important. But obviously, you know, all of culture, and this in a way is part of culture, reflects what's going on in society. So, you know, one has to do two things. One is work in whatever ways one can to make the world a better place and a kinder place, at the same time as being able to foresee and anticipate the kind of problems that AI and in this instance, large language models are likely to produce, and think about how to rein them in. But Jana and James, do you have any sort of specific knowledge and thoughts on this?
Susan, I'd like to add to it too, that I think we have a more specific kind of problem, which is who publishes, because we're dealing with the published evidence. So the models will be dominated by who publishes, and also the languages they publish in. So ideally, we want some kind of system that will take in publications in any language, but we would still be dominated by the countries and the groups that publish most research.
Mm.
Jana, Robert, do you want to add anything?
So I could just jump in very briefly to say that I think the problems that language models have are kind of common to all data-driven enterprises, that they learn biases that are there. So the problem is in a way in the data, and this comes back to what you said, who publishes or what gets published. This is already biased. And then you put a model on top of that, it will reflect those biases and maybe amplify them, depending how it's used. So this is something which we have to be conscious of whenever we build systems that work in a partially automated way. And one of the reasons why we cannot transition to full automation in the foreseeable future.
There's a series of questions coming for you next, James. One that relates very closely to what's just been discussed. Building on the learning language model conversation, what if you train the language model on OpenAlex rather than the typical databases of what people are saying?
Yes, that's happening. So watch the various spaces where it's happening. It's potentially, and there are indications that you get more reliable data out of those models. The big challenge is that OpenAlex is great, but it's not full text papers, it's just the titles and abstracts. So information which isn't in titles and abstracts doesn't get modeled. And at the moment, most of, I don't know, I assume it's most research literature is still sitting behind paywalls. I don't know what the proportion is actually, but a lot of the literature that we're interested in, a large proportion of it actually, when we were doing some evaluation work on it, is in subscription journals. So at the moment, we don't have any language models which are looking across all subscription journals as well. So we've still got a challenge with data.
There's a question that I've lost where it is. It was about whether one can only get are all the PDFs available on the database once you go into it. And then there's another question about, do the databases only include those papers that are computer readable? Presumably the old ones that cannot be, there are old ones that cannot be read. If old ones aren't included, what is the oldest publication date that is readable?
Yeah, that's one of the findings from a bit of evaluation work we did a little while ago on the coverage of OpenAlex and Microsoft Academic. That was that journals which went out of print prior to sort of things getting onto the internet, those papers are the ones that may be missing from not just the papers themselves, but actually a reference to the paper. So we only know about them thanks to them appearing in bibliographies of other papers. As for full text papers, we provide links. At the moment, we don't try and download them all because that would would kind of replicate what other people are doing elsewhere, but you can link to them, and then whether or not you can get access to the paper depends upon what subscriptions you've got.
Regarding the old papers, I don't know whether Susan or Robert would like to comment on how old are papers that are relevant to behaviour today.
In the field of smoking cessation, for example, I would say not massively. And there was a real sea change in the quality, excuse me, of intervention evaluations taking place in smoking cessations around sort of 1990-ish. And it was coincident with two things. One was the beginnings of publications of guidance, like consort guidance, so that people had better indications as to what to put in, and also the fact that actually pharmaceutical companies were starting to get interested in smoking cessation, and therefore having to doing trials that had to meet certain standards in order for to get their drugs regulated, and that kind of percolated through to behavioural research quite a bit. So I would say it's not that the earlier trials are not important, because obviously they are, but from my understanding and experience in reading the studies, if you go back even only to 1990, you can pretty much get a good indication, especially when it comes to looking at what the components of interventions are doing.
There is also the fact that the base rates of the behaviours in society change, so that the interventions that are likely to be effective change. And that will be true clearly for smoking in the UK, but maybe not for smoking in other countries. And it will also be true for physical activity. Patterns of physical activity have changed, so that the starting point of the population and the potential for change is very different.
Yeah, I mean, just to give you an example, in the late 1960s, a brief advice trial was published, which increased smoking cessation rates by up to 40%. 40% of people were able to stop smoking, having just been told to stop smoking by their GP. Now, nowadays you'd kill for that kind of outcome in the most, advanced specialist treatment. So it was low-hanging fruit in those days.
Okay, here's a serious question for everyone to think about. Are the panel concerned that at some point humans will no longer be required in the loop on an intellectual level, so will continue to be so on a moral level, and therefore be excluded from the system's decision-making process? Jana, do you want to come in on that?
I can start. So I think that if we were in a situation where machines, and we're now talking about predicting the most effective interventions, right? I think if we were in a situation where machines could do that better than humans, then we should celebrate that, right? And just rely on those very effective machines. But we're not there yet, because even the very exciting advanced technologies that we're seeing coming through at the moment are not able to do better than humans for this task and for many other tasks. So if we're talking about the far future, I think, yeah, it would be great if we had really more effective tools, but I'm not worried about this. James, I see your hand is up. Do you want to?
Yeah, I wanted to go next. Only just to say that, for a start, not particularly, partly because whilst, ChatGPT and the like are very impressive, they're also really bad at some very basic stuff. So on current evidence, we shouldn't be that bothered. Obviously, the trajectory is improvement. But then I think what I'm more concerned about actually is that some of these tools are seductively impressive, and the danger is that they get used for purposes and they get rolled out and used as though they could do things that they can't do. And I think that's more of a risk than they actually are able to do it at the moment.
Yeah, so they're not able to actually synthesize evidence, right? To deal with the data that comes from the studies and derive sensible recommendations based on them.
No, but they pretend that they can.
Yeah,
exactly.
They always answer the question, and then when you tell them they got it wrong, they go, yeah. So
I think I mean, one of the problems is that it's unpredictably inaccurate. So you just do need humans to be able to check if what you're trying to find out are facts. What I find they're very good at is structuring an area of knowledge, and especially an area of knowledge that one's not particularly familiar with, where it's not a question of facts, it's more about organizing thinking around something.
Can I just make a point in relation to this human in the loop thing, and the prospect of us ever being able to take humans out of the loop? I think that one of the really big issues there is the rare catastrophic failure of a system that isn't able to sense check, because it doesn't know everything. It doesn't have that kind of type, that, you know, it's a generative AI system. It predicts stuff. It doesn't sense check stuff. And, you know, we see that in automation. We saw that with the, you know, really unfortunate crashes of the 737 MAX aircraft, where you had an automated system that had not been, you know, properly evaluated, or you know, and pilots hadn't been properly trained on, and therefore there was no human in the loop to stop a catastrophic failure. And it was rare. And this is the thing, you know, and if it's rare and unpredictable, you've got to have some fail-safe system in there. You know, certain things it doesn't matter, but, you know, you can imagine a situation where, you know, really important decisions are being made about it, you know, things to do with, you know, controlling infectious diseases or whatever. You've got, you know, I think we're a long, long way from humans not being needed in that way.
Yeah.
And I mean, the question talks about intellectual level and moral level, and I just wanted to share an anecdote about my earlier life. My father was a professor of machine intelligence, and on my 21st birthday, 1976, which shows how old I am, he took me to Venice, and I remember we had lots of fascinating conversations, but one of them was about his fear that you know, machine intelligence could develop in such a way, and it sounded very science fiction-y then, but I think it's becoming less so as time goes on, that they would be able to communicate with each other. And it wouldn't just be that we might not be able to know what the language or the codes were, but his belief was that they could begin developing kind of constructs that we would intellectually not be able to engage with, and that we could then lose control. So anyway, I have a very poor memory, but that did stick with me. But it you know, it goes back to you know, this issue about the partnership between humans and AI, and what's it going to look like, and how we keep control of a technology which may get out of control in many different ways.
So making sure that the machine keeps us in the loop. A simpler question, Susan. Is the mechanism of action ontology also included in the prediction tool? Maybe that's Jana.
Yeah.
I'm afraid it was not part of the small subset of ontology features that were available for annotation at the time of the 500 papers annotation for smoking cessation. So we don't have mechanism of action in the prediction tool yet, but for future work, definitely.
Earlier on, there was a question from someone about how long it takes to annotate, which is partly what you're referring to, that we haven't done that annotation. And Robert has referred to how many items in the ontology, how many entities are annotated. Can somebody give an estimate of how long it takes to annotate a paper for 70 entities? Maybe we don't know the answer to that.
Well, for 70, I mean, we annotated a lot more than 70.
Yeah.
It's just those are the ones that were common enough for us to use in the ML prediction system. But if you were to annotate, I mean, I worked out that the average paper has got at least 500 important annotatable bits of information in it that really ought to be captured in order to make good predictions. if you, Susan and I wrote a paper which is published in Chaos, which actually contains a calculation of how much it would cost to annotate papers that are coming through the system, and it's something that's way beyond what anyone would be willing to fund, which is one of the reasons why we need to automate this process, or somehow or other, either with paper authoring tool or some combination of paper authoring tool and machine annotation. And James, I don't know, this is maybe an opportunity to talk about where you're currently at, because we are making some progress now, better progress in automated annotation. We're not quite there yet, but certain things will be feasible, I think, won't they, James?
But before James answers that, just to say that it really depends, and I know people don't like the answer, it depends, but it very much depends on the training, the experience, the expertise of the people doing coding, and also on the way in which the papers have been written to get in the first place. The things that really take time are the ambiguities, where you have to think about it. Is it this or is it that or neither? And then consult with another expert, etc. So, I think there's huge variation depending on those factors.
The next question also relates.
Oh, sorry, James. Okay.
Do you want me to? I can very quickly say that what we've been doing is looking at what was difficult within the project, which was especially getting the structure of arms in a study out of the papers. So we've been looking at randomized trials. Randomized trials have arms where one intervention or multiple interventions are compared against each other, and if people in each arm get a different intervention or different set of intervention components. And what was very difficult to do, and what's very difficult to do if you're just looking at the text of a document, is to automatically identify the number of arms and what the arms are called and who got what in which arm, because it's all just a flow of text. We found actually that using the consort flow diagrams, which are part of the consort statement for how you report randomized trials, if we can automatically read them, we actually get the structure of the study out quite nicely in terms of the number of arms and what the arm labels are, which we're then next step is to sort of take that into the text and connect up with the statements of which arm got what. So there are ways of doing it, but it's a slightly sort of decreasing circle in that we're then dependent on papers having reported using consort, which the newer ones do, fortunately. Older papers tend not to, and also have got a readable flow diagram. So we want RCTs, papers that report RCTs using consort, papers that report RCTs using consort with readable flow diagrams. So there's still some gaps there, as you might imagine, which are at the moment still difficult to fill.
There's a question about things that may not be there in papers. So the question asks, assessing techniques have been applied and the outcomes tells us something, but we know how important it is to understand how the techniques have been applied or delivered, the interpersonal techniques. This is the fidelity that was often missing in studies. What are your thoughts here? Can I just ask that more generally, as this is referring to all of the things that are missing in papers that are currently written and the kind of thing that the paper authoring tool will overcome. Is fidelity one of the things that's frequently missing?
Yeah, really. It is fidelity and adherence. So if we think of fidelity as the extent to which the intervention was delivered as planned, and adherence as the extent to which participants engaged with the intervention as planned, like turned up to sessions or downloaded the app or whatever, then these are things that massively important for the outcomes of interventions, and yet so poorly reported. So yes, and obviously the idea with the paper authoring tool is that it provides a structured way of capturing that information. As things stand at the moment, it could be a lot more structured using the engagement part of the BCIO, which is still, I think, currently being developed. It's not quite published yet, but once we've got all those components, we'll have a very, very structured way that people can report that can then be brought into any automated or other kind of prediction system.
And of course, tidier separates out the two aspects of fidelity. Did they have a system of tracking it? And if they did, what did they find?
And tidier is the acronym for a framework for reporting interventions. Mary, in the chat, there was a mention that Ian Keller's got a question, and there's a sort of sub question which is up at the top of the upvoted list.
Ah.
Shall I read it out?
In the prediction tool, will there be
Yeah.
a means of automating the identification of the most efficacious combination of BCTs? Can I just say that was also the question we were just coming to about how to optimize the intervention automatically. It's the same question. How do you find the best one?
Yeah, so I think this is something which we spoke to briefly before, that the current system makes predictions and you can manually go through the options in order to explore the prediction space. But of course, a very sensible next system to build around it is to automatically explore the model and do a comprehensive search to find the recommendation, let's say, out of the prediction. And of course, this will have to be implemented with caution because there are limitations in the model and in the underlying data. But I think it will be a valuable addition. Robert, do you?
Yeah, definitely. And I think so. What it wouldn't do is just give you, oh, this is what we recommend. It would give you a sort of hierarchy. You know, these seem to be our top recommendations and why. The interface would also want you to specify whatever constraints might be operating on your system, like, you know, this is pregnant smokers, you know, or, you know, this would be young people, or, you know, I'm going to do it by an app. You know, I've decided it's going to be an app. So whatever, tell me what you've got for apps. So I think it's quite a, you can imagine it's quite a big job, and it's quite a big search space, isn't it, Jana, for, you know, so it's not a trivial task for an algorithm to do, but it's very, you know, doable.
It's very doable, and it's an exciting, let's say, next step or next project for the prediction system. I would say, I think it would also benefit from being linked through to the evidence and some sort of sense of how much evidence is behind a given prediction, because maybe there's some parts of the model that have more confidence and other parts of the model which have lower confidence, and this at the moment is not represented in the current interface either. So,
Mary, I'm noticing that quite a few people are leaving, and it's been quite a long session. So I wonder, unless there's anything that you spotted that you think is really burning that we haven't covered, whether we can answer the rest of them along with the questions that came up in the webinars on the Open Science Framework page, and move on to the conclusion.
Okay, I can give you all a final question. Some topics simply don't have good RCT level evidence. Is there no hope for behaviours where the evidence is weaker?
Well, I think that different study designs have different pros and cons. RCTs aren't always the best because obviously they're more selective in terms of the people that are included in the study, and therefore often less ecologically valid. Other study designs are more ecologically valid but have less powerful causal inference. And this is where triangulation, the notion of triangulation, comes in, where, you know, every study with its study design gives you a certain level of confidence. The more that you can get different kinds of study designs and different studies that are all pointing in the same direction, the more confident you are in the finding. And, you know, so I think it's not a question of, you know, chucking out the weaker evidence. The beauty of being able to use AI with large complex data sets is you can look at patterns, and you can use ontologies, as Jana was saying earlier, to combine different kinds of data that have been gathered in different kinds of designs. So I think that, you know, the sort of hierarchy, you know, in sort of evidence-based medicine in terms of good versus less good designs becomes less relevant when one can bring artificial intelligence to the table. So that would be my answer.
you're talking across study designs. The other part of this question is about the different behaviors. And it's actually, and it is still possible that if you use the behavior ontology, you can maybe find evidence for a behavior at a higher level than the specific behavior. So if someone identifies some new addictive behavior, maybe they can learn from other addictive behaviors. If someone wants to learn something about a new exercising behavior, they can learn from other exercising behaviors. Anyone else want to come in on this one?
So I would just add that I think the overarching project is really, this is exactly the objective, to be able to use the data to determine what we can generalize to questions for which we don't yet have good evidence base. So, yeah.
Okay, can I thank everybody for answering the questions and hand back to Susan?
Thank you very much. And I think Robert will share the final slides, which is really thinking for the future.
Can you not see them?
Ah, sorry.
We can see them.
I can't see them. Can you see them?
I can
Yes,
see
they're
them.
there.
Yeah, can see them.
Well, isn't that really odd? I did say that I was very bad at oh yeah, I've got it now. Great. Excellent. Okay, so I started talking about this webinar. It's not a webinar, sorry, this launch of the knowledge system about the crises facing humanity. And I'm going to go back to that. It really means we urgently need to accumulate knowledge at speed and at scale, and knowledge that can predict outcomes and answer a wide range of users' questions with sufficient accuracy and consistency. And during this project, we've come to the conclusion that we need a revolution in our whole research ecosystem. We didn't go in with that as a big thought in our heads. I mean, we all have our criticisms, but we certainly come out of the 6 years with this very strong view that if we are to be able to accumulate knowledge at speed and scale that's needed to address these massive existential problems we're now facing, we need to do something radical. From the way that research is funded to the way that knowledge is used. And we ought to be harnessing AI to build a truly scientific behavioral science. And I think we've given some indication of being a few steps along the journey from compared to where we were. So we've also touched on the fact that we need AI. You can go back, Robert. We need humans in the loop. And so a key next step, and one that this team has really begun thinking about and putting together a proposal for taking this work forward, is to discover how we can optimize a hybrid human artificial intelligence. That's what we feel we need. And we also feel we've got ideas and strategies as to how to achieve it. Okay, so one of the things we wanted to do in this launch was to familiarize yourself, all of you, with the new website and the tools and resources on it. And all those boxes you can see there, we've been through. There's actually a 10th box, which is the research browser, which is at the bottom of the page. You can't see it. But if you look in the red box at the top, I've just put a red line around this. These are tabs which are helping you to learn, resources, the ontology, prediction, webinars, theories, techniques, training, authoring, and browser. So you can find everything you need through those or through the other icons that you see before you. Okay, and thank you for coming. I hope that we've managed to communicate the information in a way that's been engaging and that's accessible, that we've shown you the range of things that can be done, and that you are able to follow this up by using them. Do keep in touch, do give us feedback, and we look forward to our paths crossing in the future and having hopefully lots of collaborations with those of you who, like us, think this is an important way forward for the discipline. Thank you very much.